Hello, my dear friend, and welcome to tonight's story. A gentle journey into a mystery where the mind must unravel the most intriguing of puzzles. My name is Tony, and I'm so glad you are here with me tonight to share in the quiet world of Sherlock Holmes, where each clue is carefully examined, each question answered, and each mystery solved with elegance and brilliance. If this is your first time joining me, I am so very happy to welcome you. Like a traveler arriving at a peaceful retreat after a long day's journey, and if you've been here before, it's wonderful to see you again. Like a friend returning home after time away, your presence here makes this moment even more special. And I am grateful for every breath we share. Now, I know that today may have been long. Perhaps you felt the weight of tasks that stretched on. Or perhaps your thoughts have been restless, darting from one thing to the next, like leaves swirling in a gentle breeze. But now, you're here, in this quiet, peaceful space, where everything slows down, and the only thing left to do is to listen, to let the story unfold around you, like a soft and soothing lullaby. Tonight, we will follow the brilliant detective Sherlock Holmes, alongside his faithful companion, Dr. Watson, as they work together to solve a mysterious case. This is not a case of fear or darkness, but rather a puzzle, a riddle that requires sharp eyes and a sharp mind to unlock. Our story begins with a young woman who seeks Holmes's help to uncover the truth behind the strange death of her sister, a death shrouded in mystery. The only clue she has is a faint whisper, the mention of a speckled band. What could it mean? And why did it matter so much to the woman? Together, we will follow Holmes as he carefully examines the clues, unraveling them one by one. In his usual meticulous fashion, before we begin our adventure, let's take a moment to unwind. Take a slow, deep breath, and let the day's troubles fall away, like leaves drifting on the wind. Find a position where you can feel most comfortable, where your body can rest, and your mind can settle into stillness. If you haven't already, close your eyes now and feel the weight of your eyelids become heavier with each breath you take. Inhale gently, filling your lungs with calm, like a soft breeze filling a sail, and exhale, letting all the tension of the day fade away as you sink deeper into the comfort around you. There's no hurry, no need for effort, just my voice and the gentle rhythm of your breathing, moving together, slowly, calmly. If you enjoy this journey with us tonight, please remember to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. Your support helps us to continue creating these peaceful, relaxing stories and your feedback helps us improve, so we can bring you even more moments of calm and wonder. Now, we are ready. Let's step into our story. The mystery of the Speckled Band is waiting for us. Part 1. The Mysterious Visitor. It was a quiet morning in Baker Street. The kind of morning when the city seems to hum softly in the distance. But nothing feels urgent. Sherlock Holmes, sitting in his usual armchair by the window, was lost in thought, his long fingers resting lightly on his chin, his eyes gazing out over the London skyline. Beside him, Dr. Watson sat at his desk, writing in his journal, the soft scratching of his pen filling the room. The fire crackled in the hearth, its warmth spreading through the room like a comforting embrace. The world outside seemed to move at its usual pace. But in the stillness of the room, there was a sense that something was about to change. And then there came a soft knock at the door. Dr. Watson looked up from his writing, a little surprised. It was rare for anyone to come calling at this early hour. Holmes, however, was already on his feet, his sharp eyes narrowing as he crossed the room with his usual grace. He opened the door, and there, standing before him, was a young woman, a woman whose expression held both determination and fear in equal measure. She was dressed in a modest gown, her hands tightly clasped in front of her. Her eyes, wide with urgency, met Holmes's gaze. "Mr. Holmes," she said, her voice steady, but with an edge of desperation. "I need your help. I believe my life is in danger." Holmes studied her closely, his sharp eyes taking in every detail. From the way she held herself to the faint tremor in her voice, he had already noticed the faint marks of distress, the way her hands fidgeted in her lap, the deep circles beneath her eyes. It was clear that this was no ordinary request. "Please, come in," Holmes said, stepping aside to allow her entry. She nodded gratefully, her eyes still filled with anxiety, and stepped into the room. Dr. Watson stood, looking at her with a mix of curiosity and concern. He wasn't used to seeing Holmes so focused, but something about this woman's presence seemed to ignite his detective's instincts. Holmes gestured for her to sit. "Now, madam," Holmes said, his voice calm, yet carrying the weight of someone who had seen many strange cases in his time. "Tell me what troubles you." The woman hesitated for a moment, as though she was searching for the right words. Then, finally, she spoke. "My name is Helen Stoner," she began, her voice steady but strained, "and I fear for my life." Dr. Watson listened intently, sensing the gravity of her words, and Holmes remained silent, his expression unreadable. his eyes never leaving her face. Helen continued. 2 years ago, my twin sister Julia died under mysterious circumstances. She said, her hands, which had been still for a moment, began to tremble once more. She was found in her room, dead in her bed, but there was no sign of injury, nothing that could explain her death. The only clue was a strange, faint sound that she had heard the night before. A low hissing noise. Dr. Watson raised an eyebrow. His curiosity piqued. Holmes, however, seemed to already be processing the information. He motioned for Helen to continue. After her death, I moved into her room, Helen said, her voice trembling now. And I began to notice strange things. At night, I hear the same hissing sound. It seems to come from the wall, from behind a ventilator, and recently, I've been feeling as though I am being watched by someone or something. I know it may sound strange, but I fear for my own life now. I believe someone is trying to kill me. Just as they killed my sister, there was a moment of silence in the room. Holmes stood still, his fingers tapping lightly against his chin as he considered her words. Dr. Watson looked from Helen to Holmes, waiting for the detective's response. "This is most intriguing," Holmes finally said, his voice calm, almost detached. A mysterious death, a strange noise, and now you are hearing the same sound. I must admit, I am curious. You have come to the right place, Mrs. Stoner. Holmes turned to Watson. Watson, we shall investigate this at once. Dr. Watson nodded, and Helen, though still clearly shaken, felt a glimmer of hope rise within her. If anyone could solve this mystery, it was Sherlock Holmes. Now, Holmes continued, "Tell me more about the circumstances of your sister's death. You say she was found in her bed, but you never mentioned the details of her condition. How did she appear? What else did you find?" Helen took a deep breath. Gathering her thoughts, she was found early in the mornings, as though she had fallen asleep in peace. But her expression was one of terror, her eyes wide open, her mouth frozen in a scream, and her body was cold. Even though the room was warm, Holmes nodded, his mind already working through the details. A curious case indeed. Tell me, Mrs. Stoner, have you noticed anything unusual about the house, about the people in it, since your sister's death? Helen hesitated again, but her voice grew firmer. Yes, my stepfather, Dr. Roylott, has been behaving strangely. He lives with us, and since Julia's death, he has been more erratic. He is a man of great strength and temper, and I fear his presence in the house is part of what is behind this. Holmes's eyes narrowed, and he turned to Watson, his mind already racing. This is certainly a case worth investigating. He said, I shall visit your home, Mrs. Stoner, and we will see what can be uncovered. Part 2. The visit to the estate. The next morning, Holmes and Dr. Watson made their way through the bustling streets of London. The quiet hum of the city filling the air as they walked toward the train station. Helen Stoner's house was located outside the city, a journey that would take them into the countryside, to a place where the air was cleaner, the skies clearer, and the mystery they sought to solve lay hidden within the walls of an ancient estate. The train ride was peaceful, the gentle sway of the carriage providing a calming rhythm as the train passed through the lush green fields. Holmes sat with his usual quiet intensity, his eyes gazing out the window. Deep in thought, Dr. Watson, ever observant, glanced at his companion, noticing the way Holmes seemed to be piecing together the puzzle in his mind, though Holmes spoke little. There was an unmistakable focus about him. He was already formulating a plan. What do you make of the case, Holmes? Dr. Watson asked, his voice quiet, respectful of the stillness in the air. Holmes shifted slightly in his seat, his piercing gaze turning toward Watson, his mind sharp as ever. The case is certainly intriguing. Watson, we are dealing with something more than a simple accident. Helen Stoner's sister's death was no mere coincidence, and the hissing sound she heard before her death is the key. There is something unusual at play here, something carefully orchestrated, and I believe we will find that the answer lies within the very house that Helen inhabits. Dr. Watson nodded thoughtfully, understanding the depth of Holmes's analysis. The detective's mind worked at a pace far beyond that of ordinary men, and it was clear that he was already piecing together a theory, one that would soon reveal itself. The train journey seemed to pass in the blink of an eye, and soon they arrived at the small station near the Stoner estate. The air was cool, the gentle breeze carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. They stepped off the train and made their way to the waiting carriage, which took them through a winding road that led to the heart of the estate. As they approached the Stoner family home, the house itself came into view, an imposing structure, surrounded by tall trees that seemed to stand like silent sentinels. The house was old, its stone walls weathered by time, and the windows were dark, with only the faintest light filtering through the heavy curtains. Holmes's sharp eyes took in every detail, from the ivy creeping up the sides of the house to the overgrown garden that lay untouched for what seemed like years. Everything about the estate felt still, as though it were a place frozen in time, holding its secrets behind closed doors. The carriage pulled up to the front door, and a servant opened it for them, ushering them inside. The house was just as Holmes had imagined. Dark, quiet, and heavy with the scent of dust and age. There was a stillness in the air, as though the house itself was waiting for them to uncover its hidden truths. They were led through a long hallway, its walls lined with paintings that seemed to watch them with silent eyes, and into a small sitting room where Helen Stoner was waiting for them. She rose from her seat as they entered, her eyes filled with both hope and apprehension. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," she said, her voice steady, but with the faintest trace of fear. "I am so glad you are here. I hope you will be able to uncover the truth for my sister and for me." Holmes gave her a reassuring smile, his sharp eyes studying her closely. "We will certainly do our best, Mrs. Stoner. Now, I believe it would be best if we took a look around your sister's room, where she passed away." Helen nodded, and with a slight gesture, she led them upstairs to the room where her sister had died. The hallway was narrow and dimly lit, the air thick with the scent of old wood and faded wallpaper. Helen stopped in front of a door and opened it, revealing a small, modest bedroom, decorated with floral patterns and lace curtains. It was a room that had clearly once been full of life, but now it felt empty, as if the air itself had been drained of its energy. Holmes stepped inside, his eyes immediately scanning every detail. The bed was neatly made, the sheets crisp and white. There was a faint smell of lavender in the air, but the room still held the quiet weight of tragedy. "Tell me more about the night your sister died," Holmes asked, his voice calm and soothing. He was already beginning to piece things together in his mind, but the details would help him see the larger picture. Helen hesitated for a moment, her voice trembling slightly as she spoke. Julia was terrified the night before she died. She spoke of hearing a strange sound coming from the ventilator in the wall, a hissing like the sound of a snake, she said. She was so frightened, she refused to sleep, but I persuaded her to try. The next morning, she was found dead, with her eyes wide open and her mouth frozen in a scream. Holmes nodded thoughtfully, his mind working at full speed. "A curious sound, indeed," he murmured, "and one that I believe will be key to understanding this case." He moved toward the bed, his sharp eyes scanning the room for any clues, anything that might help him solve the puzzle. Holmes walked around the room slowly, his fingers brushing lightly over the furniture, the walls, and then finally, the ventilator. He knelt down beside it, his eyes narrowing as he examined the small opening in the wall. "Interesting," he said softly. "Very interesting." Part 3, the investigation begins. Sherlock Holmes rose from his crouched position beside the ventilator, his fingers lightly brushing against the dusty floorboards. He stood upright, his sharp eyes scanning the room once more. A room that, at first glance, seemed so ordinary, yet was filled with hidden stories, waiting to be uncovered. "I must confess, Mrs. Stoner," Holmes said, his voice calm and deliberate, "this case is proving to be more intriguing by the moment. Your sister's death, while tragic, holds secrets that are waiting to be revealed." Helen Stoner, still standing near the door, looked at Holmes with a mixture of hope and anxiety. "Do you think you can solve it?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Do you think you can uncover the truth behind her death?" Holmes smiled gently, his eyes filled with quiet confidence. "I believe I can, Mrs. Stoner, but the truth, as always, is hidden in the smallest of details, and it is my job to uncover them, one by one." He turned his attention back to the room, his gaze lingering on the ventilator. "Tell me, Mrs. Stoner, when did your sister first mention the sound she heard?" Helen thought for a moment before answering. "It was the night before she passed away. She was in her room, lying in bed, when she heard the sound like something moving in the wall. It frightened her terribly. She said it sounded like a snake, hissing from behind the ventilator." Holmes nodded slowly, his eyes narrowing as he processed the information. "A snake, you say?" He turned to Watson, who had been silently observing, his curiosity piqued by the strange details. "I suspect that the answer lies within the very walls of this house," Holmes said, his voice filled with a quiet certainty. "A sound like that of a snake would certainly explain the terror your sister felt." Dr. Watson stepped forward, his interest growing. "But how could such a sound be made?" he asked. "And what could be hidden within the walls that could explain such a thing?" Holmes smiled faintly, as if savoring the puzzle before him. "That is the mystery we must solve, Watson. But first, we must examine the surroundings." He moved toward the window, his eyes scanning the garden outside. The estate, though grand, was secluded, surrounded by tall trees and dense foliage. The walls of the house seemed to close in around him, and Holmes could feel the tension of the house itself, the weight of its secrets pressing against him. Holmes turned back to the room, his sharp eyes landing on the bed again, studying every inch of the space with quiet intensity. "Let's take a look under the bed, shall we?" he asked, without waiting for an answer. He knelt down and peered underneath the bed. There, in the shadows, Holmes spotted something. A faint glimmer. A small, shiny object partially hidden beneath the dust. His gloved hand reached out, and he retrieved it carefully. It was a small, ornate whistle, a strange trinket, but one that seemed oddly out of place. Interesting, Holmes muttered, holding the whistle up for Dr. Watson to see. This whistle, I suspect, may hold more meaning than we first realize. He stood, holding the whistle in his hand as he turned to Helen. Mrs. Stoner, do you recognize this? Helen's eyes widened as she looked at the whistle. No, she said, her voice trembling. I've never seen it before. Holmes nodded thoughtfully, his mind already working through the possibilities. I believe this may be linked to the mysterious sound your sister heard, but we must find out who brought it into this room. And why? He moved toward the door, his gaze flicking back to Helen. We shall need to speak with your stepfather, Dr. Roylott, he said, his voice firm. He may hold the key to this mystery. Helen's face paled at the mention of her stepfather's name. Dr. Roylott, she asked, her voice filled with unease. I'm afraid he is not an easy man to talk to. He is volatile, and I fear his temper is as dangerous as the mysteries of this house. Holmes's eyes glinted with quiet determination. Then we must speak to him and find out what he knows. It is crucial to the solution of this case. Dr. Watson stood by Holmes's side, nodding in agreement. Let's not waste time. The sooner we uncover the truth, the better. Part 4. The Stepfather's Secrets. Holmes and Watson made their way down the narrow, dimly lit hallways of the Stoner estate. The air in the house felt heavier now, laden with the weight of unanswered questions. Helen had led them to a small study near the back of the house, and there, waiting for them, was Dr. Roylott. He was a tall, imposing figure, his broad shoulders and stern face giving off an air of authority and arrogance. Holmes studied him carefully, his sharp eyes taking in every detail, the slight twitch in Roylott's jaw, the way his eyes narrowed as they entered. It was clear that the doctor was not pleased to have guests in his home. What is this? Dr. Roylott's voice was low, gravelly, but laced with an unmistakable edge of hostility. Who do you think you are? To come into my house and ask questions about my family? Holmes remained unfazed, his demeanor calm but assertive. I am Sherlock Holmes, and this is my companion, Dr. Watson. We've been asked to investigate the death of your stepdaughter's sister, and we're here to find the truth. Dr. Roylott's eyes flashed for a brief moment, and then, as if deciding whether to dismiss them or engage, he stepped forward. I don't need any meddling detectives in my house. He growled, "My daughter is grieving, and your questions only stir up more trouble." Holmes didn't flinch, his gaze steady. "The truth, Dr. Roylott, can only help. It will bring closure to your stepdaughter, and it will bring peace to this house. And if you are truly concerned for her well-being, you would want us to uncover the truth as well." For a long moment, Dr. Roylott remained silent, his hands folding into fists at his sides. Finally, he spoke again, his voice colder this time. "I will not stand for any more of this nonsense," he said, his tone warning, almost threatening. "I am a man of science, and I trust only what can be proven. If you think that my house holds secrets, you are mistaken. You will find nothing here. Nothing but the grief of a broken family." Holmes studied him intently, his mind working furiously. It was clear that Dr. Roylott was hiding something. His resistance, his quick defensiveness, were not those of a grieving father, but of a man trying to cover his tracks. Holmes could almost feel the pressure building, like the quiet moments before a storm. "Very well," Holmes said, his voice softening. "We won't trouble you any further, but we must ask one more thing. Dr. Roylott, may we take a look at your stepdaughter's sister's room?" Dr. Roylott's eyes narrowed again, his jaw tightening. "I've already told you. There's nothing to be found. You waste your time with these idle questions." But Holmes, his calm demeanor unwavering, took a step closer. "We are simply trying to understand the events of that night. The hissing sound, the strange circumstances surrounding her death. It all points to something unusual, something that cannot be ignored if you care for your stepdaughter's well-being. You'll let us investigate." For a long moment, Dr. Roylott didn't speak. The tension in the room was palpable, like a taut string ready to snap. But at last, with a reluctant sigh, he nodded toward the door. "Fine," I said, his voice tight. "Go ahead, but don't expect to find anything useful." Holmes and Watson exchanged a brief glance, and then they followed Dr. Roylott out of the study, down the hall to the room where Julia Stoner had died. The room, though the same as it had been when Helen led them inside, seemed even more suffocating now, as though the air itself was thick with secrets. Holmes stepped inside first, his eyes sweeping the space, not missing a single detail. The room was neatly kept, the bed made up with fresh linens, but Holmes's gaze immediately fell upon the ventilator, the source of the mysterious sound Julia had described. Holmes moved toward it without hesitation, his eyes narrowing as he examined the small opening in the wall. He ran his fingers over the edge, noticing how old the wood was. How worn and warped it had become with time. It seemed harmless enough. But Holmes was not one to overlook even the smallest detail. Dr. Roylott, standing by the door, watched them closely, his posture rigid, as though ready to defend the room against any further intrusion. "What are you looking for?" he asked, his voice laced with suspicion. Holmes didn't answer at first, his focus entirely on the ventilator. Finally, he turned to face the doctor. "I believe this ventilator holds the key to your stepdaughter's sister's death," he said quietly, his voice calm, but his eyes sharp. Dr. Roylott stiffened, his gaze flickering to the wall. "You're wasting your time," he muttered, his voice low. "There's nothing here. No snake, no hissing, just your imagination." Holmes gave him a measured look, but did not respond. He stepped closer to the ventilator, his fingers gently tracing the edges, as though listening for something deeper, something hidden. Then, just as he had suspected, Holmes's sharp eyes caught sight of something unusual. There, near the base of the ventilator, was a faint scratch, a mark, barely noticeable, but enough to indicate that something had recently been moved. Holmes's eyes gleamed with quiet satisfaction. He turned to Watson. "This is where we'll find our answers, Watson," he said softly. "The truth is hidden behind this ventilator. It's time to uncover it." Part 4. The Stepfather's Secrets. Holmes and Watson made their way down the narrow, dimly lit hallways of the Stoner estate. The air in the house felt heavier now, laden with the weight of unanswered questions. Helen had led them to a small study near the back of the house, and there, waiting for them, was Dr. Roylott. He was a tall, imposing figure, his broad shoulders and stern face giving off an air of authority and arrogance. Holmes studied him carefully, his sharp eyes taking in every detail, the slight twitch in Roylott's jaw, the way his eyes narrowed as they entered. It was clear that the doctor was not pleased to have guests in his home. "What is this?" Dr. Roylott's voice was low, gravelly, but laced with an unmistakable edge of hostility. "Who do you think you are, to come into my house and ask questions about my family?" Holmes remained unfazed, his demeanor calm but assertive. "I am Sherlock Holmes, and this is my companion, Dr. Watson. We've been asked to investigate the death of your stepdaughter's sister, and we're here to find the truth." Dr. Roylott's eyes flashed for a brief moment, and then, as if deciding whether to dismiss them or engage, he stepped forward. "I don't need any meddling detectives in my house. He growled, "My daughter is grieving, and your questions only stir up more trouble." Holmes didn't flinch, his gaze steady. "The truth, Dr. Roylott, can only help. It will bring closure to your stepdaughter, and it will bring peace to this house. And if you are truly concerned for her well-being, you would want us to uncover the truth as well." For a long moment, Dr. Roylott remained silent, his hands folding into fists at his sides. Finally, he spoke again, his voice colder this time. "I will not stand for any more of this nonsense," he said, his tone warning, almost threatening. "I am a man of science, and I trust only what can be proven. If you think that my house holds secrets, you are mistaken. You will find nothing here. Nothing but the grief of a broken family." Holmes studied him intently, his mind working furiously. It was clear that Dr. Roylott was hiding something. His resistance, his quick defensiveness, were not those of a grieving father, but of a man trying to cover his tracks. Holmes could almost feel the pressure building, like the quiet moments before a storm. "Very well," Holmes said, his voice softening. "We won't trouble you any further, but we must ask one more thing. Dr. Roylott, may we take a look at your stepdaughter's sister's room?" Dr. Roylott's eyes narrowed again, his jaw tightening. "I've already told you. There's nothing to be found. You waste your time with these idle questions." But Holmes, his calm demeanor unwavering, took a step closer. "We are simply trying to understand the events of that night. The hissing sound, the strange circumstances surrounding her death, it all points to something unusual. Something that cannot be ignored if you care for your stepdaughter's well-being. You'll let us investigate." For a long moment, Dr. Roylott didn't speak. The tension in the room was palpable, like a taut string ready to snap. But at last, with a reluctant sigh, he nodded toward the door. "Fine," he said, his voice tight. "Go ahead, but don't expect to find anything useful." Holmes and Watson exchanged a brief glance, and then they followed Dr. Roylott out of the study, down the hall to the room where Julia Stoner had died. The room, though the same as it had been when Helen led them inside, seemed even more suffocating now, as though the air itself was thick with secrets. Holmes stepped inside first, his eyes sweeping the space, not missing a single detail. The room was neatly kept, the bed made up with fresh linens. But Holmes's gaze immediately fell upon the ventilator, the source of the mysterious sound Julia had described. Holmes moved toward it without hesitation, his eyes narrowing as he examined the small opening in the wall. He ran his fingers over the edge, noticing how old the wood was. how worn and warped it had become with time. It seemed harmless enough, but Holmes was not one to overlook even the smallest detail. Dr. Roylott, standing by the door, watched them closely, his posture rigid, as though ready to defend the room against any further intrusion. "What are you looking for?" he asked, his voice laced with suspicion. Holmes didn't answer at first, his focus entirely on the ventilator. Finally, he turned to face the doctor. "I believe this ventilator holds the key to your stepdaughter's sister's death," he said quietly, his voice calm, but his eyes sharp. Dr. Roylott stiffened, his gaze flickering to the wall. "You're wasting your time," he muttered, his voice low. "There's nothing here, no snake, no hissing, just your imagination." Holmes gave him a measured look, but did not respond. He stepped closer to the ventilator, his fingers gently tracing the edges, as though listening for something deeper, something hidden. Then, just as he had suspected, Holmes's sharp eyes caught sight of something unusual. There, near the base of the ventilator, was a faint scratch, a mark, barely noticeable, but enough to indicate that something had recently been moved. Holmes's eyes gleamed with quiet satisfaction. He turned to Watson. "This is where we'll find our answers, Watson," he said softly. "The truth is hidden behind this ventilator. It's time to uncover it." Part 5. The Hidden Truth. Holmes stood before the ventilator, his fingers gently brushing against the worn wood. His eyes focused intently on the small scratch he had uncovered. Dr. Roylott's presence in the room felt heavy, as though the very air was charged with his tension. He stood by the door, his arms folded across his chest, watching Holmes with a mixture of suspicion and frustration. It was clear that the doctor was growing impatient. But Holmes wasn't concerned. He knew he was on the verge of something significant. "Watson," Holmes said, his voice calm and steady, "I believe it's time to take a closer look at the ventilator. There is something here that we have yet to uncover." Dr. Roylott let out a low, almost inaudible growl, his eyes narrowing as he watched Holmes move with such precision. But Holmes, undeterred by the doctor's discomfort, carefully removed a small tool from his coat pocket. He gently pried at the edge of the ventilator, his movements deliberate, almost meditative. The wood creaked slightly, and the small opening began to widen. For a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath, the quiet anticipation thick in the air, like the calm before a storm. Holmes leaned closer, his face illuminated by the faint light filtering through the curtains. And then, With a final, careful push, the ventilator shifted just enough to reveal what lay hidden behind it. Holmes's eyes gleamed with quiet triumph. There, in the shadowed space behind the ventilator, was a small, coiled rope. It was thin, nearly invisible at first glance, but unmistakably deliberate. Holmes reached in carefully, his fingers brushing over the coiled material. "Ah, this explains it all," Holmes murmured, his voice filled with a quiet satisfaction. He turned to Dr. Roylott, his eyes fixed on the doctor's rigid form. "I believe we have found the source of your stepdaughter's sister's mysterious death." Dr. Roylott's face hardened, and for the first time, Holmes saw a flicker of something deeper in his eyes. Fear. It was fleeting, but it was there. Holmes held up the coiled rope, his eyes never leaving Dr. Roylott's face. "This, I believe, is no ordinary rope. This is the very same material that your stepdaughter's sister likely saw in her final moments." He paused, his voice becoming even more measured. "But it's not the rope itself that's the key. It's what it is attached to." Dr. Roylott shifted uneasily. Holmes's sharp gaze cut through the tension in the room, as if peeling away layers of secrecy with every word. "You see, this rope is tied to a much larger mechanism. A mechanism that I believe was set in motion the night your stepdaughter's sister died." Dr. Roylott's face twisted with irritation. But Holmes was undeterred. "You've been hiding something, haven't you, Doctor? Something so sinister that you've gone to great lengths to protect it." There was a moment of silence. The house seemed to grow stiller, the air thicker, and then, with a resigned sigh, Dr. Roylott spoke, his voice low and strained. "I see that I cannot escape your scrutiny, Holmes," he said, his words filled with bitterness. "You're right. There's something in this house, a secret that I've kept hidden for years. But it wasn't meant to harm anyone. It was a tool, a way to preserve my legacy." Holmes remained calm, but the intensity of his gaze never wavered. "A tool," he repeated, his voice filled with disbelief. "A tool that led to the death of your stepdaughter's sister. A tool that you used to frighten and intimidate." Dr. Roylott clenched his fists, his frustration turning to anger. "You think you know everything, Holmes, but you don't understand. You don't understand the lengths I've had to go to in order to protect what's mine." Holmes took a step closer, his demeanor unwavering. "I believe I understand more than you think, Doctor. This house, this estate, it's all been part of your plan. But the truth has a way of revealing itself. No matter how well it is hidden." He paused, his eyes scanning the room one final time. Then, turning back to the ventilator, Holmes took a deep breath. "Now, Dr. Roylott, I must ask you to explain the mechanism that you've set in place, for it is clear to me now that your stepdaughter's sister was not the first victim. There was a long pause. The tension between them was palpable, and for a moment, the only sound in the room was the soft crackle of the fire in the hearth. Dr. Roylott's shoulders slumped, as if all the strength had been drained from him. He knew it was over. Holmes had pieced it all together. Very well, Dr. Roylott said, his voice heavy with resignation. I will tell you everything. Part 6. The Final Revelation. Dr. Roylott sank into a chair by the fire, his hands trembling as he rested them on his knees. Holmes stood before him, his posture calm, his piercing eyes never leaving the doctor's face. Dr. Watson, standing by the door, watched intently, waiting for the truth to emerge. The room seemed to hold its breath, the silence stretching between them like a heavy fog. Finally, Dr. Roylott spoke, his voice low and heavy with the weight of years of secrecy. I suppose it's time you knew the whole truth, Holmes. He paused, his gaze shifting toward the floor. The mechanism you've uncovered was no accident. It was a trap one that I set long ago, and it was intended for Julia, my stepdaughter. Holmes took a step forward, his mind already racing, but he remained silent, giving Dr. Roylott space to continue. The truth was now within reach, and he knew it was only a matter of time before all the pieces fell into place. Julia was always the one who stood in my way, Dr. Roylott continued, his voice thick with frustration. She was the last one who could stop me from getting what I wanted, the fortune I had married into. But it wasn't just the money. It was the control, the power I would gain. Holmes's eyes narrowed, his attention never wavering from the doctor. So, this was about more than just money, wasn't it? He said, his voice calm, yet filled with a quiet intensity. Dr. Roylott nodded slowly, his hands shaking. Yes, it was about control. You see, I needed Julia gone, and I knew that her sister, Helen, would eventually inherit the estate as well. But before I could ensure that Helen would be my next target, I had to make Julia disappear quietly, without leaving any trace. Holmes stepped forward again, his eyes keen with understanding. And you used a snake? Yes. Dr. Roylott interrupted, his voice growing strained. A trained snake. A very poisonous one. I kept it in a locked room, and I rigged the ventilator so that it would enter Julia's room, slither down through the air duct. I planned to have it bite her in the night, so that it would look like an accident. Holmes took a deep breath. his eyes glinting as he pieced the story together. So, you used the snake to kill Julia, but something went wrong, didn't it? Julia must have heard the hiss, and in her fear, she screamed. But you had planned to use the same method on Helen, didn't you? Dr. Roylott shuddered at the mention of Helen's name. Yes, I did, he whispered. But when Helen moved into Julia's room, the plan was thwarted. The snake became confused, and the whole thing was ruined. I thought I would try again with the same method, but now Helen knows too much. It was always meant to be the same fate. Holmes stood silently for a moment. Allowing the truth to sink in, he turned to Dr. Watson, who had been watching the entire exchange, his face etched with concern and disbelief. So, the truth is clear now, Holmes said, his voice calm, but with an undercurrent of resolve. Dr. Roylott's actions were driven by greed and fear that his wealth would slip away, and greed for what he believed was rightfully his. Dr. Roylott, now broken and defeated, hung his head. I never meant for any of this to happen, he said, his voice shaking with regret. But in my desperation, I lost myself. The snake, the trap, it all became too much. And now, I have lost everything. Holmes turned to Helen, who had remained silent during the exchange, her face pale and filled with sorrow. She stepped forward, her eyes meeting Dr. Roylott's for the first time. You were my stepfather, and you did this to me, to Julia. Her voice trembled, but there was a quiet strength in her words. You took away the person I loved, and tried to do the same to me. I don't know how to forgive that. Dr. Roylott raised his head slowly, his face filled with regret and shame. I am sorry, Helen, he whispered. I am so sorry. I've destroyed everything. Everything I loved. There was a long pause, the weight of the truth hanging in the air like a heavy fog. Holmes stood motionless, his mind already turning over the implications of the case. Dr. Roylott had been driven by his own twisted desires, but in the end, it had all come crashing down. Holmes turned to Watson, who nodded in quiet agreement. The case is solved, but it will not bring back what was lost. He turned to Helen. You are free, Mrs. Stoner. Your past is behind you now, and your future lies ahead. Helen nodded slowly, her heart heavy, but her mind now free of the terror that had gripped her. Thank you, Mr. Holmes. Thank you for everything. That brings us to the end of our story. Thank you for listening, and I hope to see you again for future stories.